The right level of focus is the individual. And what individuals can do first is like what a physician should do. First, do no harm, right? Like assume that, you're probably a force for mayhem and trouble unless you've got yourself disciplined and aimed.
Right.
Because you're complicated and troublesome. And so unless you've got your act together, you're trouble. And everyone knows that. And they know people like that. So the first thing you do is constrain the amount of damage you're likely to do. And you do that by disciplining yourself and by also admitting to yourself that you don't know what you're doing, that there's lots of things about you that need to be improved, which is actually, that's a beacon of hope, right? It's like, well, my life is miserable. Yeah, but you're doing a bunch of things wrong. It's like, oh, good, because if I'm doing a bunch of things wrong, then maybe if I fix them, my life won't be so horrible. Well, that's good. And everyone knows about the fact that they're not doing things right, fundamentally. They don't have to examine their conscience that much to figure that out. And then you can start aiming for something good. Start not lying any more than you have to, or maybe not at all if you can train yourself. Then you start to discern truth from falsehood, and then you can find out empirically, does your life get better or worse? Well, I've got hundreds of letters now, maybe thousands of letters from people who have been trying that, and they say, well, I'm way better. I'm doing way better than, than I thought that I was before. I went into a restaurant the other day in Toronto, and this kid came up and he shook my hand and he said, I just want you to know that since I've been listening to you, I've got 3 promotions at this restaurant. And I said, well, good work, man, like way to be. And he said, yeah, well, I started coming in on time and I'm working really hard and I'm trying to figure out how I can do a good job here instead of being above the job, I'll take this until I get something better. It's sort of beneath me. It's like, no, probably not. Actually, it's not that easy to do most jobs. It's actually hard to do most jobs, especially to do them well. And it turns out that the world is constituted, if society is set up well, that if you do a good job, invisible doors open in front of you. Because people, and I know this, I've had lots of contact with businesses and academic institutions, and like the people who run things competently are often, but not always, very interested in finding young people that they can mentor and move forward. It's actually one of the pleasures of being competent in something.
Yeah.
And so if they see someone who's like going that extra mile, busy people have lots of opportunities around them. And they think, oh, I've got that opportunity. I can't really do it, but I can funnel it over to this kid here.
Yeah.
Like, let's see how he or she does it. And so you say, yeah, you want to try this? And the person says, well, I don't have time. It's like, well, okay. But the smart kid says, yeah, yes, I'll do that. And then the person with opportunities watches and thinks, okay, well, let's, we'll back up a bit, see if the person does it. And if they do it, it's like, hey, here's 4 more opportunities that I don't have time for. The system is rigged against you, okay? You're gonna die. You're gonna be ill. Like, it's rough, man. Now, you don't want to lay that at the feet of the social structure, because the social structure, at least in part, is trying to have you not die, right? I mean, that's why we have walls and electricity and all of that. It works pretty damn well. You're probably going to live till you're 80. And the only reason you're not going to live longer is because we can't figure out how to get you to live longer. That's why. You're not going to starve to death. Wild animals aren't going to tear you in pieces. Tyrants aren't going to rip you from limb to limb. It's like, these are good things. Now, you still got a big problem because the cosmic system is rigged against you in a sense. But, okay, so fine.
What do you mean by that, the cosmic system?
You're vulnerable and you can be broken, and you will be in many ways. But you can't blame someone for that. It's just, that's the structure of reality. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, as far as I can tell, and I've always looked as a psychologist for optimistic ideas. And I'm not an easy sell with regards to optimistic ideas, especially because of my basic belief in the idea that, the most profound truth is that life is suffering. It's okay, fine, life is suffering. You can't blame that on anyone. All right, so what do you do about it? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe the jig's up, it's hopeless, but maybe that's not right. Maybe here's something. what you have against the suffering and the malevolence, let's say, you have possibility, you have potential in front of you, inside of you even, whatever that means. So here's the question. What would your life be like if you made use of all the potential that you were offered? That's the optimistic question, because you can test it out. Say, okay, well, I'll just try that for a year. I'm gonna do the best I can at everything that offers itself to me, just as an experiment. And then I'm gonna see, well, is my life better or is my life worse? It's like, you try it for a year, you think, it's actually better. My friendships are better, my family's better, I'm less anxious, I'm more positively oriented, I'm less resentful and bitter and jealous and angry. I'm more physically healthy. It's like, hey, great, and you're not that good at it. It's like, what happens if you did that for 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good addiction.
That's an addiction. Yeah, it's an addiction to possibility. And then it's also an exponential thing. And this is actually technically true. We know this beyond a shadow of a doubt. There's this principle that economists talk about. They often call it the Matthew principle, which is based on a statement in the New Testament. From those who have everything, to those who have everything, more will be given. And from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. It's really a vicious statement. But what it means is, as you go downhill faster and faster. And people know that. It's like, it isn't linear, man. It's exponential. You do one thing stupid, then 2 stupid things happen, then 4 stupid things happen. And, before you know it, you're done. But the reverse of that is also true. You do one good thing and then, you get 2 opportunities and you fix them up and you get 4. And this is how the world works. It's a fundamental economic principle. And you see, because of that a small proportion of people have most of the gains accrue to them. And they're the ones, they're healthy. That's luck often, They didn't get run over by a bus. Like, there's lots of arbitrary things about life that have to go right. But after that, it's like, those are also people who are capitalizing on what they're being offered without bitterness or resentment. And then maybe it won't work for you, but you don't have a better plan than that. So there's a rule for working with old people in old age homes, and the rule is, don't do anything for the residents that they can do themselves. You think, well, that's pretty harsh. It's like, no, it isn't. You're helping them retain their independence and their strength, right?
Yeah.
So you're not stealing their strength. And it's the same with little kids. Like, little kids should be doing whatever they can that's productive and useful as young as they can. People talk a lot about self-esteem, which is it's very badly conceptualized self-esteem, because it's come to mean you should feel good about yourself, which I don't believe. I think you should feel good about who you could be if you got your act together. And you shouldn't be feeling so good about who you are now in your sorry state. It's like, what the hell, man? You're 17. Don't be feeling too good about yourself. Get your act together and see what you could be and feel good about your trajectory.
Yeah.
That's way different, but also your competence. And so, like, even with little kids, is they know they're being taken care of. They have an existential debt to their parents. It's like, if you allow them to be useful and encourage them to do things, then they get to pay off that existential debt. And then they can see that they're contributing members of even this small society. And it's no lie. One of the studies was a study of motivation, technical study of motivation in rats. Let's say you want to motivate a rat. Okay, so first of all, you make him hungry, and he'll work for food. So then maybe you have him learn this maze. He has to run the maze to get the food reward. And so he runs it a few times. He knows there's food there. So you put him at the beginning of the maze and you let him go, and then you watch how fast he goes to the maze. Now, there's a couple of ways you can measure his motivation. You can attach him to a spring and have him pull against the spring, and then, you get some estimate of how much work he's willing to put in to go down the maze, or you can time him. Okay, so now imagine you got your hungry rat and you let him go at the beginning of the maze, and he zooms up to get the food, and he's, moving at like 10 miles an hour. But now you do something different. You put him in the same place, but as well as him being hungry and going after the food, you waft in a little bit of cat odor.
Danger.
Now, yeah. Rats hate cats. They can't stand them. Even if they've never met a cat, they can't tolerate the odor. It really terrifies them. And so that rat will run towards that food much faster than he will if he's just hungry. And so, like, if you want to run towards something that you want, it's really useful to be running away from something you truly don't want.
Yeah.
And I thought about, so that's part of the reason we built that into the system. And I had a metaphysical take on that too, which is like many religious systems have a kind of notion of something like hell that's very well developed in Christianity. And so hell is where you end up when you lie. That's one way of thinking about it, in a very good way. You might think, well, is there any psychological utility in that idea? And the answer is, yeah. You need to know where you could end up if things went wrong, because then you're motivated by fear to move forward. If you're not motivated by fear to move forward, then your fear's in front of you stopping you. Because you might think, oh my God, I can't take the risks necessary to attain these goals. What if something goes wrong? Well, it's like, yeah, well then you're frozen. But if you think, no, wait a second. There's risks to proceeding, but nothing compared to the risks of failing. So then the fear is behind you, pushing you forward. That's so you need a vision of hell. It's like, okay, what's your personal vision of hell? You let your life fall apart because of your own stupidity and your own blindness. It's like you're the worst place you could be in 5 years. Well, that's what we ask people to write about. Arithmetic helps too.
In which sense?
Well, this is something I've done with big groups of students and my clients as well. It's like, okay, I ask students in particular between the ages of, say, 18 and 20. It's like, well, how much time do you waste in a day? Is it an hour? And people say no. Is it like 4 hours? No. 10? No. It's usually about 6. I can get a group of 200 students to agree that they're just wasting 6 hours a day. No, and by their own definition of wasting, right? So, okay, so then we do some mathematics with that. We've got the 6, that's fine, 6 hours a day. Okay, so that's 40 hours a week. All right, so then I think, well, what's your time worth? And they think, well, minimum wage, because most of the students, if they went out to work, they'd only get minimum wage. But that's not right, because that's a discounted version. Their time is worth way more than that if they're working on something useful, because it's an investment. So it's perfectly reasonable to assume that if you're a reasonably bright student, your time is worth $25 an hour, something like that, because of its potential for future payoff. It's okay. Well, that's $1,000 a week. Right, so it's $4,000 a month, it's $50,000 a year. In 4 years, it's $200,000. So that's what wasting your day is costing you. It's like, let's make no mistake about it. You're going to be $200,000 poorer in 4 years because you're wasting your time. Is that really what you want to do? You're rich enough so that you're willing to forego that $200,000. Well, no one's ever sat them down and said, look, put an estimate out of the value of your time. Figure out how much of it you're wasting, and then ask yourself if you really think that that's a good idea. Because it's actually not a good idea. And I don't think anybody thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah. Damn straight. I think it ties into if it gets measured, it gets managed. The moment you start putting stuff down in numbers, that does something to our brain.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the goal-setting issue. It's like you calibrate things and make them precise. You can no longer hide from it. And the funny thing too is that, because I also ask the classes the same thing. Well, do you enjoy yourself while you're wasting that time? And the answer is always no. People feel terrible. It's like, they're watching one YouTube video after another that they're not even interested in, or they're watching like endless amounts of pornography or some damn thing, or they're playing video games, not because they want to, but because they can't stop, and they know they should be doing something else. It's not enjoyable time. So not only is it and that's part of why it's wasted. It's like it's not productive and it's not enjoyable. Well,
so how much of that procrastination is, because setting goals is a great counter to that, so how much of that behavior, if you look at it, because it's not rational behavior, is also sort of kind of same like goal setting, wired into us because of our evolutionary path? I've always wondered about procrastination in myself, like why am I like that every now and then?
That's a good question. Well, look, procrastination needs no explanation. The answer to should you do something difficult and energy intensive is no, because it's difficult and it's energy intensive, right? So there actually has to be your default position can easily be, no, I'm not going to do that difficult and intensive thing. There should be some internal resistance to doing that because it's costly. Okay, well, but then you think, well, wait a second, there are conditions under which investing in something intensive and energy demanding is appropriate. Well, yeah, but you got to specify the conditions. Like, why should you listen to yourself? You can think about it this way. Why should you listen to yourself if you're an idiot? You know what I mean? If you don't have a plan, your body's thinking, no, I'm just going to sit here and take it easy because who knows when the next antelope is going to come along so I can kill it. I'm just going to lie here like a lion and wait.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you need a reason that that's a bad idea.
And I think a track record, like the goals and the reasons and and that you've already chased after a few antelopes, for example, and you've actually managed to do it. So you can.
Well, there's that too. You know, because your deeper self might be saying, well, you want me to get up and do something. What makes you think I can trust you? You know, you're not just running down some blind alley. Well, if you've had some victories, you can say, no, we're serious about this. Mm-hmm. And so, and then the goal setting too, like I would think about it more like, it's more like the development of a vision. It's a better way of thinking about it, I think. Because goals, it's a bit narrow in a sense. The idea is that you can have a vision of the future and a counter vision. And that you, not only can you have it, you need that. It's, without that, you won't move forward against your procrastination.
How do you remain focused and productive in the face of insurmountable work?
Lists, schedules, and I have help. I mean, my wife in particular in the last year has been unbelievably helpful. I mean, it's become a full-time job for her, really, helping me manage my schedule and keep me on track. But a lot of it is, like, I get up in the morning, I have, like, everything scheduled. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. There's a hierarchy of priority, and I'm really operating on a day-to-day level right now because there's so many things to do. I can't look more than about a day or two ahead, although it's basically scheduled. You know, but I learned to discipline myself when I was in graduate school. When I was writing, I wrote a book called Maps of Meaning that was published in 1999, and I worked on that for about 15 years, about 3 hours a day. And I really sort of grabbed myself by the scruff of the neck and, like, forced myself to learn how to concentrate without deviation. All right, you got 3 years, man. You're going to live them anyways. Devote those 3 years to setting the world up around you so that it's the best it could possibly be for you, as if you were taking care of yourself, as if you cared for yourself. Well, what would that look like? You know, let's say, just for the sake of argument, if you figured out where you were, that you could have what would be best for you. Well, what is that? I bet you never asked. People don't ask. And so life comes at them like random snakes, and they sort of fend them off. And life goes by, and things don't work out the way people expected them to. But a huge part of that is they didn't know where they were, because they wouldn't look or didn't know that they should look. Ignorance and willful blindness, right? Two great catastrophes. And they never figured out where they wanted to go or why. Now, there's a problem with figuring out where you want to go. And the problem is that you make your conditions for failure clear to yourself. And people don't like that. So if you keep yourself in the fog, then you can't tell when you screwed up. Now, that isn't so good because you're still screwing up. You're just too blind, self-blind to notice, although in the short term that's less painful. If you make your criteria for success razor sharp, then you know every time you screw up. But that's great because then you could fix it. You could either repair the behavioral inadequacy or the conceptual inadequacy that you're using as a tool in that situation, or maybe you could adjust your damn plan. Either way, you can fix it. And so, okay, so you're living in one of these bloody things, and you might as well, it seems to me, you might as well make it the best one you could live in because you don't have anything better to do. Now, if you don't do that, if you don't do it consciously, and this is what the psychoanalysts pointed out, is that you have innumerable quasi-autonomous subsystems that make you up that will generate stories impulsively, and you'll just act them out. And you know that because you watch yourself over 2 weeks and you think, Jesus, I did a lot of stupid things in the last 2 weeks. And you think, why? And it's because you're a collection of somewhat random quasi-autonomous personality units, and lacking a leader they're just going to fire off whenever they want, First you're hungry, then you're thirsty, then you want to go to bed with your wife, Then you want to sleep in, then you want to tell your boss off, then you want to curse at the guy that cuts you off in traffic. It's like you're kind of like a 2-year-old, just it's one emotional frame after another vying for dominance. There's no overarching hierarchy, and there's no king at the top. I've been telling people online in various ways and in lectures that they should start fixing up the world by cleaning up their room. And I wanted to just elaborate on that a little bit before I get back to the lecture itself. So, as it's become this weird internet meme, and it's a joke, and good, it's a joke. I'm really happy about the fact that so much of this has got like the leaven of humor in it. It's really important, because that's what stops things from degenerating into conflict, humor. And I was thinking about this idea of cleaning up your room in relationship to the mustard seed idea. And you see, the thing about cleaning up your room, this is also something I learned from Carl Jung and his studies on alchemy, because for Jung, when the alchemist was attempting to make the philosopher's stone, he was not only engaged in the transformation of the material world, but he was engaged in a process of self-transformation that occurred at the same time as the chemical transformation. So it was a psychological work in some sense. Let's say you want to sort out your room and beautify it, because the beauty is also important. And let's say that all you have is just a little room, like you're not rich, you're poor, and you don't have any power. That's another thing. But you've got your damn room, and you've got this space right in front of you, that's a part of the cosmos that you can come to grips with. And you might think, well, what's there in front of you, right in front of you? And the answer to that is, it depends on how open your eyes are. That's the proper answer, because you could say, and William Blake said this, for example, and Aldous Huxley made comments that were very similar, that in a transcendent state, you can see infinity in the finite. And you might say, well, you can see infinity in what you have within your grasp if you look, and you could say, maybe that's the case with your room. And so you want to clean up your room. Well, okay, how do you do that exactly? Well, a room is a place to sleep. And so if you set your room up properly, then you figure out how to sleep and when you should sleep and how you should sleep. And then you figure out when you should wake up. And then you figure out, well, what clothes you should wear, because they have to be arranged properly in your dresser. And then you have to have some place to put your clothes. And if you're going to have some clothes, you have to figure out what you're going to wear those clothes to do, right? And then that means you have to figure out what you're going to do. And then your room has to serve that purpose, because otherwise it isn't set up properly. And if it doesn't serve your purposes, you will be unhappy and not happy in the room, because the way that we perceive the world is as a place to move from point A to point B in. And then if the place that we're in facilitates that movement, then we're happy to be there. And if the place that we're in serves as an obstacle to that movement, then we're unhappy to be there. And so what it means to set up your room is that you have to have somewhere to go that's worthwhile, or you can't set up your room, and then your room has to be set up to facilitate that. And then the next thing is, well, maybe you have to make it beautiful. But that's not easy, right? That means you have to have some taste. And that doesn't mean you have to have money. It doesn't, because you can be garish with money, and you can be tasteful with nothing. All you need is taste, and taste beats money when it comes to beautifying things. Not that money is trivial, because it's not, but taste is crucial. And people who are very artistically oriented can make beautiful things out of virtually nothing. And not only that, the literature suggests that if you're going to make beautiful things, putting real constraints on what you allow yourself to do facilitates creativity instead of interfering with it. Because let's say you have to make something out of nothing, right? Which I suppose would be a godly act, right? You have to make something out of nothing. You have to be creative in order to do that. And so then to beautify your room means that you also have to develop your capacity to be creative. And so then you can make your room shine. But then what will happen is that if your family isn't together, they will interfere with that. You'll interfere with that, because you won't have the discipline to do it properly. But then when you start building this little microcosm of perfection with what you have at hand, then it'll evoke all the pathologies of everyone in your household. They'll wonder what the hell you're up to in there. And they won't necessarily be happy, because if they're in a lowly place, let's say, and so are you, and you're trying to move out of that, then the higher you move out of that, the more the place they're in looks bad. And you might say, well, what they should do is celebrate your victory over chaos and evil, but that isn't what will happen. What will happen instead is that they will attempt to pull you back down. They'll attempt to, and I mean, obviously all families don't do that, but all families do that to some degree, and some families do almost nothing but that. And so what that means is that if you're going to organize your room, then you're going to have to confront the devils in your house, and that's often a terrifying thing, because some of those devils have lineages that go back many, many, many generations, and God only knows what you have to struggle with in order to overcome that. And so to sort yourself out and to fix up your room is a non-trivial matter, and you can do that. You'll learn by doing that, and then maybe you'll learn enough by doing that so that you can fix up your family a little bit, and then having done that, you'll have enough character so that when you try to operate in the world at your job, or maybe in the broader social spheres, that you'll be a force for good instead of harm, because you'll have learned some humility by noting just how difficult it was to put your damn room together, well, and yourself for that matter. And so you'll proceed cautiously with your eyes open towards the good. Do you plan your day much, or your time generally? Does this lead to higher productivity? Yes, I plan my day obsessively. My calendar is always absolutely full, and often weeks in advance. And I plan in the morning, especially when I'm on top of things. And I plan each hour, and I probably plan each minute. And yes, it leads to way higher productivity. You decide what your goals are going to be. You place them in the calendar. Use the calendar as your friend, Because what you want to do with the calendar is design a day that you want to have, or a day that would be good for you. And a day that would be good for you is one that you're when you end the day, you feel that you've moved yourself ahead towards your valued goals, and that you've kept chaos under control. And that enables you to sleep soundly and with a good conscience, and to know that the next day is going to be at least not worse than that. Planning is unbelievably useful. And again, I don't want to sound like a broken record with regards to the future authoring program, but it really is useful. You need to figure out what it is that you're aiming at and why, and then you need to figure out how you're going to break that down over the months and the weeks and the days. But I would approach your calendar like it's your best friend. You think, okay, I'm going to design a week, man, that I really want to have. And that means you can schedule in leisure and all the things that you want to do, which you absolutely should do. And it's also quite fun to give yourself minimal time to do something complicated, because it's quite challenging to see if you can do far more than you thought in far less time. Treat yourself like you're someone that you care about. See, I read this piece of work by Jung a long while back, and it was a meditation on the injunction to treat your neighbor as you would like to be treated, something like that. And what Jung pointed out, which I really liked, was that wasn't an injunction to be nice to other people. It was an invitation to reciprocity. It was something like this. It's like, you should figure out how you would like to be treated, like you were taking care of yourself, not how you would like people to respond to you. It's more important than that. It's like, imagine you had a child that you really cared for, and someone said, well, people will treat this child exactly like you want them to, but you have to figure out what that is. And so then you'd have to sit down for like a month, and you'd think, okay, well, how do you want your child to be treated? You don't want everyone just to be nice to him, you want people to challenge him, and you want people to discipline him, and you want people to tell him when he's wrong. It's like, you don't just want everyone to be nice. That's pathetic. It's pathetic. There's no challenge in that. And so, well, you want to treat other people like you would like to be treated. Well, then you have to figure out, how would you like to be treated? And while you'd like people to fawn all over you and just lay everything at your feet, it's like, no, that's not something you'd wish for someone that you were taking care of. And then there's an additional problem, which is it's often the case that people will treat other people better than they treat themselves. That happens extremely frequently. So one of the things I pointed out in chapter 2 was that if you have a dog and you take him to a vet and the vet gives you the prescription medicine, you'll go buy the medicine and you will give it to the dog and you will do it properly. But if you go yourself to a doctor and you get a prescription, there's a 30% chance you won't even pick up the medication. And if you do, there's a 50% chance that you won't administer it to yourself properly. And so I really thought about that. When I first came across that statistic, it was another one of those little facts. I thought, what's up with that? It's like, you'll do it for your dog, so obviously you'll do it for something you care about, and you're conscientious enough so you'll actually do it. So like, why wouldn't you do it for you? Your dog likes you, even your dog would rather that you did, but you don't. And it's actually one of the reasons that modern medicine doesn't work nearly as well as it could, because people just don't take their medication. You make the world a much better place, much worse place if you don't take care of yourself. So you should bloody well take care of yourself, because, well, that's what the chapter's about. It's partly because you have something valuable to bring into the world. That's the thing about being an individual. It's the thing that Western civilization has always recognized, that as an individual, you have a light that you have to bring into the world. And that if you don't bring it into the world is a dimmer place. And that's a bad thing, because when the world is a dim place, it can get very, very, very dark. And so it's necessary, not just so that you feel better, not just so that you're a #1 lobster, none of those things. You need to take care of yourself because you're in the best position to do that. And it's necessary for you to take care of yourself. Despite the fact that we're mortal and vulnerable and self-conscious and capable, not only capable of doing terrible things, but actually do them. Despite all that, you still have that responsibility. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And the reason I wrote that was because I had this client, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I spent 20 hours a week for 25 years listening to people tell me about their lives, and those people were people who were just barely hanging on to the bottom of the world, up to people who were so successful you can hardly believe it, like the entire gamut of people. And that's been absolutely fascinating. It's like being a clinical psychologist, if you really listen, is like being immersed in a Dostoevsky novel all the time, because it's amazing what people will tell you if you listen to them. People are so interesting if you actually listen to them, because they're so peculiar. They're like penguins or rhinoceroses or ostriches. They're unlikely creatures. And anyways, with regards to comparing yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today, this old client of mine, he was about 85 when he came to see me, and he was a financier and a kind of a mathematical genius. He made these little pendants out of a mathematical symbol for the most beautiful mathematical equation that was ever written. He made them out of gold, and he would hand those out. And he had studied psychology as a young man, and he introduced me to this concept that I didn't know about, called the Pareto distribution, which, see, I'd been taught as a psychologist that most human characteristics were normally distributed, right? So most people were average and some people were extreme. That's a Pareto or a normal distribution. Intelligence is like that, and height, there's more people of average height than very tall or very short, and weight is like that, and lots of things are normally distributed, and psychologists tend to assume that everything is, but it isn't. Creative products are distributed in a Pareto distribution, and that's a whole different thing, and it's really important to know this. It's another fundamental fact, the knowledge of which can sort of transform the way you conceptualize, let's say, the political landscape. So here's an example of the Pareto distribution. There's a rule of thumb that if you run a company, that 20% of your employees do 80% of the work, or that 20% of your customers are responsible for 80% of your sales, or that 20% of them are responsible for 80% of the customer service calls. Same thing, but that's not exactly the rule. The rule is worse than that. The rule is, in a given domain, the square root of the number of people operating in that domain do half the productive work. So you think, well, you have 10 employees, 3 of them do half the work. It's like, yeah, okay. What if you have 100 employees? Then 10 of them do half the work. What if you have 1,000 employees? then it's 30. And if it's 10,000 employees, then it's 100. And this actually turns out to be a rather ironclad rule. It applies across very, very many situations. It applies, for example, to the mass of stars and the size of cities. So you can see how universal it is as a law, and it's something like those that have more get more, and those that have less get less. That's the Matthew principle, right? To those who have everything, more will be given. From those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. And the economists sometimes call that the Matthew principle. And so what that lays out is a world that's rife with inequality. So you hear this idea that I think it's the 85 richest people in the world have more money than the bottom 2 billion. That's a Pareto distribution phenomena. And you might say, to hell with capitalism for producing that. It's like, sorry, you got your diagnosis wrong. It's a natural law. It's no matter what society you study, you get a Pareto distribution of wealth. You get a Pareto distribution of number of records recorded. You get a Pareto distribution of number of songs written or goals scored. Like any creative product has that characteristic. And it's partly because as you start to become successful, let's say, people offer you more and more opportunities. And as you start to fail, people move away from you and you plummet. And so, okay, so that's rough. So what it means is that there is always a landscape of inequality. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything about it, although I am saying that we don't know what to do about it. That's the thing, because you can modify the Pareto distribution of wealth, let's say, but we don't know how to do it without maybe disrupting the system so completely that it collapses, which is what happened in the Soviet Union, for example, and in Maoist China. They were trying, at least in principle, to adjust inequality. But the cure was far worse than the disease. And the truth of the matter is, we actually don't know technically how much inequality there has to be to generate wealth. We can guess, and you could say, well, there should be less, and you might say, well, there should be more. If you're left-wing, you'd say less, and if you're right-wing, you'd say, well, we'll just let the inequality flourish. But we do know that it's inevitable, and we also know that we don't know how to regulate it. So, there is inequality. What that means is there's always going to be people around that are better at something than you are. And that's a problem, because you can get jealous and you can get bitter and you can get resentful, and worse, you can get hopeless, because you look like I have this friend of mine. He told me something so funny. He was decrying his lack of success in the world, and he compared himself to his roommate. And he said, his college roommate was doing much better than he was. And his bloody roommate was Elon Musk. It's like, really? It's like, oh, you're not doing as well as Elon Musk. Well, you can see it would take it rather personally, because they were roommates and everything. It wasn't like he was doing badly. Like, he was doing pretty damn well. It's like, I'm not as good as Elon Musk. It's like, yeah, well, you and like 7 billion other people, But I thought it was instructive because you have to be careful who you compare yourself to. Now, you can't just not compare yourself to successful people, right? Because then you don't have anything to aim at. One of the fundamental theses of 12 Rules for Life, and also of Maps of Meaning, is that because life is essentially tragic in its fundamental essence, you need a sustaining meaning that's deep and profound, and deep and profound enough to get you through bad times, because there will be very bad times in your life. There'll be death, and there'll be illness, and there'll be disappointment of all sorts, and there'll be just the standard difficulties of life in the world to contend with, and you really must have something that's profound and powerful to set up against that. And I think that your voluntary adoption of the struggle to improve being is the proper antidote